Research shows that organisations with a learning culture are more profitable and productive than those that don't have one. But faced with tight budgets, competitive pressures and diminishing time, many organisations underinvest in both learning and training. In this panel, we'll cover how important these areas are, common mistakes companies make, and innovative ways training and learning solutions can be delivered. Our expert panel on this issue include Karen Van Druten, the Managing Director of Strategic Human Resource Consulting and Adjunct Lecturer at Macquarie Graduate School of Management, Marie-Claire Ross, CEO of Digicast Productions, and Paul Hardwick, the CEO of learning management company Seartech Solutions. It's great to have you on board TBB. Thank you for joining us. If I could start generally on the concept of training, it was once in business crucial that new staff had some degree of training. In many businesses we don't see that anymore. Is training a dying concept or is it a changing concept? Karen, I'll start with you.
If we pick up on the idea of training and expand it to learning, it's become ever more critical. In fact, training sometimes was never really picked up by small to medium businesses, and now it's just exploded.
So it's a definitional change. Marie-Claire, is it more about learning, and are there other ways that the organisation provides learning?
Well, a lot of companies realise the value of induction training, which is what it's typically called when somebody starts at their company. And induction training is crucial in aligning a new starter with the culture and the core values of the company. So done right, they will actually stay longer and they will actually be more productive a lot faster.
Paul, how have you seen the definition of training change?
Well, I think organisations are starting to, some organisations are starting to realise that learning and training is critical not only for people to perform their job satisfactorily, but also to affect any change or strategic direction that the company might have. And those companies that do realise that, do put in place systematic and lasting change within their organisation, are the organisations that really benefit from that investment. So,
where does the responsibility lie with training? We know that with the labour market as tight as it is, there's a responsibility for organisations, but also for the individual too, in training. Are we seeing any cultural shifts in that space?
I think yes and yes. I'm in violent agreement with both. I think clever organisations and better employers are starting to understand increasingly the criticality of training, also the opportunity cost of not training, which is a very new trend. And for employees, they know that they need to learn with or without an organisation.
Marie-Claire, where does a business start when looking at training needs? Is it a training audit? Where do they start?
Well, there are a couple of ways. I mean, one way is to look at the broader business outcomes and the goals that the company is trying to achieve and work out what training is needed for staff to get to those goals. Another way is more of a micro level per department. They might realise that there's a particular need within that department or that site. So it can vary.
Paul?
yeah, I think it's interesting because learning is needed everywhere, and without a systematic approach, and technology can certainly help with that, and that's where we've seen our technology used effectively. And if they tackle it right across the business, that everyone knows in the business how to use learning within their organisation, that people start to evolve from that. And so learning governance, learning a systematic approach, and making sure that there's people in your organisation who are passionate about learning and the benefits that that can drive for your organisation.
It can also be because it's tripped up. So you can come smack bang across legislation through a breach, and therefore the legislation can overtake an organisation that hasn't put in place not only policies and procedures, but systematic training, ongoing training, and programs that involve a whole lot of learning.
Right.
So it can be out of trouble as well,
That's right.
unfortunately.
Not just because you want it, but because you have to have it.
Yes, absolutely.
What are the pros and cons of outsourcing training? There are some businesses who will say, what we do is very unique. The only way of training what we do is in-house. Is that the case for some businesses? How does a business decide what's done by experts or by themselves?
Well, if I kicked it off, some training should be done internally. For example, cultural build. Certainly some key skills might only be provided by the organisation themselves, but not all skills necessarily are.
Marie-Claire?
Well, when it comes to training, I believe I agree with that statement just then, that there is some training that's better done in-house, and that's more internally based, so procedures, cultural values. And external is you use external providers when they can do a better job than you can do in-house. But I also believe that training materials need to be considered to be outsourced, because a lot of companies get so close with their training materials that it's very hard for them to write about it in an objective way. It gets a little bit complicated. It's hard for people to understand, and they're less likely to think of the right visuals to use to really help with learning.
Tell me a little bit more about what Digicast does. You use a lot of video technology in the training services you provide. In what way?
Well, educational researchers have found that 83% of learning is visual. So visual learning is a very powerful way of teaching people. It's also a very quick way. The brain processes visual information much faster than it processes words. It also is more likely to remember what it's heard and seen and read. So if you can use those three mediums at the same time, you get a better retention rate and recall.
Following along what Marie-Claire said then, Paul, to you, what do we know about training generally that makes it most effective and increases productivity most quickly?
I think the critical thing about training is you've got to make it relevant, right? There is so much out there to learn that if you can make sure that an employee knows exactly what they need to learn for their job, right? What else they need to do around that, they can then find out themselves. But what do I need to do now, and what do I need to do today? And then there's many mediums of actually delivering and affecting that knowledge or training onto that person. And video, you know, there's iPads and iPhones and things are becoming increasingly popular. Mobile learning, but unless you know the message that you want to deliver, you know, you've got to choose the right medium in order to affect that message. But the critical thing is that an employee knows, well, what do I need to know? Or what do I need to know for next week or next month in order to perform my job adequately and really get the organisation all moving in the same direction.
And we used to be more content preoccupied, and we'd do a spray and pray, or we'd hope that we'd open up their heads and fill up the content. And now it's much more customised with understanding employee needs, also appreciating some of the diversity requirements, and things like video casting and visuals and puzzles and simulations and avatars all make it much more accessible for a more diverse and sometimes underskilled workforce as well.
What role does corporate culture play? You may have an organisation that introduces a training program that says this is the one way to do it, and then when the training program is over, the employee sits down with his fellow employees and finds there's another way that everyone else is doing it. That would be common. There's learning from a training perspective, and then the real world environment where colleagues and peers might say, don't do it that way, do it our way. How do you measure whether that's good or bad? Paul?
Yeah, look, I mean, we're learning all the time. I mean, you know, I've learned just talking amongst ourselves. So, you know, learning informal and formal learning, and technology is used usually to tackle some of the formal learning components. The informal is vastly greater in terms of what people actually absorb and learn. But I think, you know,
should an organisation make sure that it's marrying its outsourced training services with what else is happening in the corporate culture?
Oh, of course, and I think the culture is critical, right? Organisations that we work with that have a learning culture see the value in the services that we provide, right? And that's immense, right? The organisations that see it as a tactical or as something that they have to do because, you know, someone told them that was their job for the week or whatever, was to go and organise a training program. Some of those organisations learn and then actually forget and get dumber in terms of learning, right? The ones that get it and the ones that continue to evolve and build on a platform of learning and that learning culture,
the ones that will succeed.
they're the ones that retain and succeed.
It needs to be part of a natural way of doing business. It's not a bolt-on and seen in a disaggregated way from everything else that we do.
Karen and Marie-Claire, how are we seeing technology change the way training happens at work? What are some interesting things we've seen over the last decade?
Well, I'd say one of the most interesting things is social media, because it's such a collaborative approach to communication. And one of the beauties with social media is that it's allowing trainees to self-learn in a more interactive way. And active training is really important. But because social media allows for really open communication, whereas before it was private, closed conversations, now trainees can get from a wider range of people, viewpoints to their questions in real time.
Karen?
I think we've also seen absolute spread of the capability to actually lift compliance in ways that we never had before, that our standards are much higher, our reach is much higher. We can actually start training, developing, influencing people long before they come into our organisation, as well as after they've left. And sometimes there are no boundaries anymore between what we're providing as informational training for all our stakeholders, indeed. And it's changed the whole nature of education, flipping classroom such that people like lecturers like myself are now moderators, facilitators, stewards, rather than content experts.
Content providers.
Absolutely.
Paul, how's technology changed the work you do?
Well, we've been doing this for 7 years, and I've certainly tracked the use of technology and the emergence of new technologies through that process. It's funny because, you know, social learning, iPads and iPhones and, you know, all of this sort of stuff was suddenly going to be, that's how everything had to be done. And, you know, people need to understand that we've all learnt through various mediums, and these are just another medium to learn something, okay? And as long as we target that medium to managing the right outcome or the right learning outcome, then that'll be very effective. And we've got some customers and great examples of where they have used that.
As an expert panel, you have taught us all very much. Karen Van Druten, Marie-Claire Ross and Paul Hardwick, thank you so much for being on TBB.
Thank you.
Thank you.